how I increased my 1 rep max for pull-ups as well as dips to 36.25 kilograms. Of course, weighted, so that's additional weight to my body weight. Overall, I think this is a story of mental framing. And this mental framing begins when I was about 11 or 12 and I got into working out. First with body weights and then increasingly with machines at home, usually at the home gym. So I also began to do pull-ups. I think around this time is the first time I began to train pull-ups. So at this time I could do around maybe 10 pull-ups, which I then very fastly, or somewhat fast, increased to I think 25, then 30. So about age 12 or 13 I already could do about 30 pull-ups. And this number stagnated basically over the rest of my life until now, mostly. And the question is why? And I even in the last years, even when I was somewhat decently fit, I would say like 4 or 5 years ago, I did not achieve this number. I could not do more than this pull-ups, these number of pull-ups. I already had some access to a weighted vest back then. So this means in addition to your body weight pulling, the main thing being the thing that you pull up, you can also just add weights. So adding weights is somewhat difficult because how do you attach weights to your body? In total, there are 2 different methods. The first one is to just wear a vest, so wear clothing basically that has a weight attached to it. This is usually referred to is a weight vest. So sometimes these are made out of sand, sometimes they have metal plates in these. They usually go up to 10 kilograms, up to maybe 20 kilograms. If you have metal plates in these then. Also, you might have seen them already in the calisthenics space or in the, what is it called? Not calisthenics, but CrossFit space, where they also run around with weighted vests because it increases the performance needed for a given exercise. So I already had this one option. So after quite some time, I began to do or to try to lift myself up with this. At this time, the 10 kilograms, with me being maybe 50 kilograms at this time, maybe 40 kilograms, maybe at some point then 60 kilograms as I aged and I also grew very latently, you could say. As this increased, of course, the same 10 kilogram vest then decreased in terms of how much this was proportional to my body weight. So this was also something I actually didn't really notice. So ideally, it would always be kind of a certain proportion of your body weight. So your performance would be kind of the performance per kilogram of body weight, the performance of your pull, the performance of your dip, the performance of your bench press, for example. If you scale it to body weight, then it might make more sense because then you can kind of compare yourself to others better. But then kind of this weight vest began to degrade over time, and I didn't really have access to something very nicely. And I also then tried freeletics, which is basically just working out with your body weight for a certain amount of time, because the gym I had access to often didn't have open, and then I would have to drive to an additional gym, which I would have to pay additionally for, and also was far away. So lots of different variables playing into this. What I'm trying to say is that for lots of years, actually for the last years, I did not really work out consistently with a pull-up vest. And even then, if I again did, so I then had access to a home gym again, I just worked out with this vest and I just didn't increase my pull-up weight because there is another variable that I for years didn't really include in my calculation. And this other variable is other people watching what you do. If you are at the gym, at least in my case, I think of this somewhat, to some extent, as kind of a performance. There are other people, so I might as well. It's not that I think about this and I intentionally think about it like this, but just as a subconscious thought, maybe constantly, there are people watching, so you might as well watch your form, because otherwise, this other dude there that lifts maybe 2 times the weight in terms of deadlift might say, "Oh well, how about your form? This is not really nice. You might." Get one of your discs out soon. So what I'm trying to say here is that by being at a gym where other people are actually also, you have a social accountability created or a social pressure created. So if you are here, then other people might be watching you, and just by the fact that other people are watching you, this might increase your pull-up maybe by 0.1% in a given session. But then over time, if it accumulates and accumulates and accumulates, then you might end up with actually better values because you train more intensively if there are other people watching you and it's not just you judging you. At least for speaking for myself, I often notice that just for myself, just seems to be a little of a goal to adhere to. And even if you already have kind of the optimal setup, then if you just leverage the additional variable of increasing your social accountability, then you might as well end up basically with better lifts over time. At least you could argue like this. So now, about a year ago, I got access again to a very nice gym that is actually also very close, and it is also very nicely outfitted, and the people there are also very nice. And so I again had access to not a weight vest, but I, after quite some time, only realized that there was actually something like a weight belt. I actually had used weight belts before. I just didn't think of these, and they also seemed to be not available at the gym. But then I noticed that they gave them out at the service counter, and that they usually did not lie around, maybe because people usually steal them. So a weight belt is a thing you put around your waist. If these are your two legs, and this is your waist, then this is your torso, and this is you, and you are happy because you're lifting weights. So now this weight belt is basically a chain that you then can attach plates to. So if you have this and there is a hole in this plate, then you can loop this chain through, and then you have this here, which is you being able to pull the plates. So what this results in is that you can now, without adjusting the weight of something that it is kind of fixed in terms of its weight, let's just say the weight vest I had access to earlier, without having access to this, and I also had older iterations or different iterations of something like this. I used my climbing harness in order to also attach plates in the past at my home gym, but I usually had only a few plates available, and so I didn't want to distribute too much of these just for the sake of being there for pull-ups, because you also need to buy them. And so I just optimized kind of for a smaller set, which made it not possible to usually dip, and I also didn't have a dip station, so to dip and also to do weighted pull-ups. But now at the new gym, I then had access to this weight belt. This access to this weight belt was kind of a limiting variable again in terms of my training efficiency, as it soon became apparent that sometimes there just was nobody at the service counter. So do I really want to spend some time of my time bucketed workout? So I do have a fixed workout slot, and I can only work out in this slot usually. And if I adhere to this rule, and if I adhere to this rule, this means if I then wait 2 minutes just to give my belt back because somebody isn't there, or I wait 2 minutes and there is nobody there and I'm running around at the gym searching for a person there, then this might also just deduce basically the time in which I lift actually. So overall, it seemed also at least partially like a maladaptation. So what I did is I bought one, and this was actually not really planned, but I recently was at Decathlon and I saw this super nice belt, which I actually will now get. And tada, you have a solution. So this belt cost 20 euros, and it has a very nice chain. It also, I think, has a very nice design, and you put it around your waist, and then you can increase your pull-up strength to whatever you feel comfortable with. So from the point in time on at which I began to visit this gym about a year ago, I first didn't do the weighted pull-ups. Then I noticed that there were these things that are meant for doing calisthenics or something with weighted. So there are these weights you can put on the back of your shoulders that are kind of sacks of weight with sand in them, sandbags you could also call them. And I just used these and put them basically onto my feet or in between my legs, and just squeezed my legs together in order to hold the weight. So I began with 5 kilograms, as I was not very strong. Actually, about last year, I could barely do like 10 pull-ups straight often, which was something that was not very, which I was not very proud of, because at age 11 or 12, I was already able to do like 30. So in terms, at least of relational strength or proportional strength, this is not very good. I then saw that there were these other additional weights, so the same sandbag also came in a 10 kilogram version. Then I noticed, and also of course I noticed before, but I then was able to switch to the 15 kilogram version, both for dips and also for pull-ups. What I also did is I introduced supersets, not specifically in general, but just I had the idea that the dip station as well as the pull-up were close together, and these were also kind of contrary muscle groups. So the first one is the pulling muscle group, which is mostly the biceps, also some part of the triceps, and also some part of the back with the pull-ups. And then with the dips, you have more of the chest activated, again kind of the triceps also, and also maybe a little bit of the back, but in total it kind of works, at least to some extent, because it is also, in terms of the weight, fairly similar what I can pull or pull myself up with the weight. So I rotate between those two. I do weighted pull-ups, then I do weighted dips, then I go back to weighted pull-ups and weighted dips, which is a fairly time-efficient way of, I think, lifting at the gym. And then I switched eventually to the 20 kilogram bag. So I was at the 20 kilogram bag for months after I began last year, and then I just didn't do anything else. I eventually noticed that I could maybe add a plate onto it, but it didn't really work out until I then saw this belt. Then I was able to increase my weight to about 30 kilograms, and then I recently got this belt, and now it's even easier, and I don't have to mentally justify the fact that just for these exercises I might spend an additional, on average, 2 minutes just for getting the belt and then putting it back, maybe forgetting it, maybe upsetting someone at the gym for forgetting it, maybe getting it stolen. So as I now have my own belt, of course this also comes at the downside of me having to carry this every time I go to the gym, at least when I need it, to the gym and back. And since I sometimes run to the gym, this is not exactly ideal. Nonetheless, I think it's, for the time being, something that I can work with. So over time, I think, or not over time, in conclusion, I think there are several factors that influenced how I was able to do this, and I'm basically approaching almost half of my body weight now, which is often what is kind of recommended in terms of developing a proper proportional strength, and maybe going even higher than this. Currently I'm progressing at a rate at about 1.25 kilograms per workout for weeks now, which seems to be fairly nice. But I'm also realizing that my reps that I'm able to do with this weight, the increased weight, are going down. So overall my progression seems to not adapt to the progression of the weight I put on. So overall, I would say, of course, that's a multi-varied function. So what this means is that there are different variables that contribute to this outcome. Of course, it also helps that I'm 6 feet tall, so therefore I am able to pull more than somebody who is less tall is able to pull, because again, it requires more proportional body strength at a lower weight or a lower height, or somebody being shorter, to pull the same kind of weight. So at my height, at my weight, I was able to do this, I think, out of several reasons. First of all, I already kind of at age 12 kind of compartmentalized the fact that I needed to work out in some way or another in order to increase this. And I needed to hit every single workout. So over the last years, I would say about 80 to 90% of all the planned workouts I hit, which usually was either every second day, and then eventually switched to 3 days a week. And currently I'm doing like 4 days or 3.5, depending on what I do at the 4th day at the gym. So what is first variable is consistency. It's not about the one workout where you work out your legs and then you can walk for a week, because then if you cannot walk for a week, there are 2 things that are happening. Of course there are multiple other things, but there are 2 things that are happening, and I also want to mention. The first one is that you cannot work as if you would have been regenerated at the next workout. And the second one is that you might also increase your injury risk. If you then are cycling or you're just running across the street and there is a train or a bus running towards you or driving towards you, you might be not as fast as getting away. So this might also increase your mortality or decrease your longevity. The second part, and I think this is a large contributor, is the social aspect. The social aspect of working out at the gym meant that almost every time I went to the gym, I just worked out. And previously, before, in my home gym, I often just sat around because I needed to work out and I don't have the strength, and I also fasted for a day, or I overate and now I had a full stomach and this and this and this. By just being there, and by other people observing you and having at least the ability to observe you and judge you, maybe, of course, they don't judge you, but maybe you're just thinking that the other people are judging you, where in reality they are just thinking about themselves and other people judging them. But of course, to some extent, in my case at least, not of course, but it seems that it helped. So the social accountability aspect of going to the gym also, if you then talk to a few people at the gym and these people are like, oh yeah, how often do you work out? And you say like 3 times, and then in the next week you are there 1 time, when the other person also said they work out 3 times at the exact specific times you work out. This might not create the best situation if you then meet the person again. And the third aspect is kind of the access, I would say. The access to tools. In this case, I framed this purchase as an improvement to this here, to this overall goal of improving my strength, increasing my longevity, or decreasing my mortality by increasing the amount of muscle I am able to carry, but also by increasing my strength, and by therefore having still health, at least ideally, if I am also old. I also, a few months ago, just decided I would go to this gym. I searched a lot of different gyms. This gym also had a sauna, so of course there are also other things involved in this, but at least in terms of this year, and I think this is one of the fastest progressions in terms of strength in the last years. For years now, my bench kind of is leveling out. It's kind of just at maintenance. For years now, basically my pull-ups didn't increase or decrease. For years now, my push-ups also didn't increase. And what I also have to mention maybe in terms of the tools is I began to take creatine a couple of months ago, and this also seems to greatly improve my workout in performance, but also just the weight I am able to lift. So it is just like, maybe it's 10% more, maybe it's 20% more, but it is something more. Overall, I think it's not as easy as saying, this increased my weight, or my dip weight, or my weighted pull-ups by this much. But it seems that I am getting stronger. It seems that also my muscular endurance is getting better. And in terms of pull-ups, there is an additional principle I want to discuss shortly, and this is the following. I think it is easier, at least for me, speaking from myself and therefore projecting onto the general public, based on my experience, which might not be a very scientific way to go about this, but if I have 2 ways of increasing my strength or increasing a certain exercise, then by just doing more pull-ups, for example, basically every additional rep requires an additional marginal unit of willpower. And I think over every rep, so if these are the reps and you go higher and higher and higher and higher, then I think the marginal unit you need in terms of willpower just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. So to go around this, or to bypass this effect, what I figured eventually is if I just keep the reps at the same, in terms of, I mean, it is kind of obvious that you increase the weight for a given exercise, let's say bench press. But I think it's not that obvious if you want to increase an exercise such as how many pull-ups you can do. I mean, it's the same route that is basically applied to all the other exercises you do in terms of optimizing for hypertrophy or muscle growth, or also strength growth over time, strength progression over time. But for some reason, at least I didn't apply it to pull-ups and dips. As soon as I applied this principle of not only increasing the rep size or the rep amount, but also increasing the weight, I began to basically increase my strength, but not just randomly, but seemingly very fast compared to not increasing my pull-up numbers for years. So now out of the 2 ways you can do in order to increase a body weight exercise, the first one would be to just try to add an additional increase, I think, in willpower, just to have more willpower and do 1 more rep. Or you could just do, instead of the, let's say, 30 pull-up reps, you could just say, okay, how about I just do 5 reps with a weight? And by doing this, you are achieving progressive overload better at a lower willpower, because at least I, for myself speaking, again, if the time frame is shorter and I also know how many reps I kind of have to do, then I don't need that much willpower seemingly, and it's easier for me to pull it off, because I do need maybe a lower level of willpower for the 5 reps compared to the 35, 45th, or I don't know how many, 45th rep, let's just say 10th rep at least, compared to the body weight exercise here. So by accessing this and by just applying the same principles of progressive overload with increasing weight and having the reps at the same size or at the same range at usually 8 to 12, if you are trying to optimize for hypertrophy, this is at least the number that is often mentioned. You could also just standardize it and say you just do 10 reps, and if you then have 10 reps, then you can increase the weight. But if you are below 10 reps, you don't increase the weight. So after all, it's not that big of a trick. It's not that I found this secret hack to increase my pull-ups, but I also found the secret hack to increase my pull-ups, because recently I did pull-ups, and from the over years stagnating amount of basically 25 was my maximum for years, I just increased it recently. After a workout, I just did them, and I had just like 36, which is a fairly high number, maybe in the 90th percentile already. And then I did push-ups, and I also usually don't do push-ups, but just by me usually not doing push-ups and also not trying to do push-ups all the time, but just lifting in terms of incline and in terms of maybe also, that's basically the main thing I do incline, because otherwise there seems to be a maladaptive change in terms of the visual appearance of my pecs, which does not look the nicest, so I just try to stick to incline. What I'm trying to say with this is I just randomly was like, okay, I just put out 82 push-ups, which also is quite high and not something I have been doing before. It's just, oh yeah, after 14 to 15 years of training, let's just randomly put out new PRs at a random session. And I think to some extent at least this was made possible by the different framing of this, by instead of trying to do one more with something that didn't work in the past, by just changing to a different frame, by just changing the method, by just adding plates, and therefore increasing my pull-ups and dips weighted to, at currently, 36.25 kilograms. 36.25